Hello, welcome back to another edition of Unmade Godzilla movies where, okay, it's the 5th video. Y'all should know how this works by now. Alright, so we're gonna do things a little differently from here on out. We've already knocked out a lot of the major Unmade projects, so going forward, I'll be covering the production history of the Heisei films. The way the poll works will still function the same, just that the video output will have a more individualized focus for the most part, if that makes sense. And with the passing of beloved actor Akira Nakao, I feel it's only logical that this video in particular would go over the production history of 1993's Godzilla vs. Mecha Godzilla 2. Anyway, let's go ahead and get this retrospective started with... So what do you do when Godzilla vs. Mothra becomes the highest grossing film of the Heisei series up to this point? Simple. Bring her back as a robot, which according to Kenpachiro Satsuma looked more like a dragonfly. Unrelated, it's funny because when I was really young playing Godzilla Save the Earth, I couldn't quite pronounce Megaguirus correctly, so I just called her Mecha Mothra. I mean, come on, I thought she looked like a robot. That aside, Koichi Kawakida's idea for Mothra's involvement in this new series of films was to originally kill her off in her debut, and then turn her into a robot in the next one. Obviously, Mothra just kind of goes off into space at the end of her film. And besides, they already did that with King Ghidorah in one movie, so it would have been repetitive if they had just turned every one of Godzilla's iconic rivals into robots. Not to mention, they've tried getting Mechanicong into the series of films before, so like, at that point, it would have just been better to bring back the actual rival who was a robot. Of course, I'm talking about... So get this, Godzilla vs. Berserk was an idea proposed by famous Gundam and Patlabor designer Yutaka Izubuchi. Here, Berserk would have been an alien life form similar to the Blob in how it grows and consumes whatever it desires, in this case metal, all to take on the form of the most powerful creature on the planet, Godzilla. A very interesting twist and throwback to the original Godzilla vs. Mecha Godzilla, retaining an alien origin and the reason the villain in question takes on the appearance of Godzilla, which would later be incorporated into Godzilla 2000. And funny enough, this draft also would have introduced the Super X3 before Toho decided to save it for Destroya. As interesting as it sounded, Izubuchi was onto something, but even though this was a take on Mecha Godzilla, it wasn't technically Mecha Godzilla. So Toho decided to reject Izubuchi's proposal and move forward with a proper Godzilla vs. Mecha Godzilla movie, but done differently. And by that I mean very differently. Obviously, I mean, we're talking about this movie after all. So I can't quite go into this one without mentioning Koichi Kawakida's idea for a series of Godzilla movies that takes place inside the monster's body, Fantastic Voyage style, where a team of humans are injected into Godzilla and fight a series of battles that would span across movies. One of these films would have included Mechanicong, because Kawakida really liked Mechanicong, I guess, but because of potential rights issues with Turner Entertainment, they decided to swap Mechanicong with Mecha Godzilla, though here instead of an alien, Mecha Godzilla would be created by humans. But for this one in particular, according to designer Shinji Nishikawa, the main characters were tasked to set off a nuclear reaction that would kill Godzilla, which would have been absorbed by baby Godzilla, who would mature before fighting Mecha Godzilla. Yeah, I can kind of see why Toho decided not to continue with this one. Like, traveling inside Godzilla to fight him is one thing, but they would have been adapting the third part of a trilogy that never even started to begin with. Not to mention, this seems very out there for a Godzilla premise, doesn't it? Yeah, arguably weirder things have happened. It has kind of happened in the Gamera series at one point, but I don't see this as an idea everybody would be in favor for. So the whole Fantastic Voyage Godzilla thing was dead and gone. But now we're getting into the real meat and potatoes of this pre-production. Considering how the last few Godzilla movies in the Heisei era at this point featured the most popular monsters in the series, and so Toho could allow time for the first ever Godzilla production made by Hollywood to make landfall in cinemas, it was decided that this new Godzilla vs. Mecha Godzilla would be the last one in this series of films, until they decided it wouldn't be. Remember, the Heisei era was never meant to last as long as it did, and of all the monsters that have managed to be box office draws for Godzilla, it came down to Ghidorah, Mothra, Mecha Godzilla, and Rodan. They likely didn't want another repeat of Biolante's reception, which according to Wikizilla, at least 2 people watched it. And Toho had plans for more original tokusatsu films like Yamato Taikeru that were already in the works at the time. But in addition to Mecha Godzilla, the film would feature Rodan, and producer Shogo Tomiyama suggested to screenwriter Wataru Mimura that he include Manila in some way, now called Baby Godzilla, just so they can draw in more of the female demographic that boosted Godzilla vs. Mothra's box office numbers. This preparatory draft of Godzilla vs. Mecha Godzilla 2 is on one hand identical to the final film, but way different in regards to the story's contents and themes. Obviously, the one thing people know about this early draft's version of Mecha Godzilla is that it was meant to be a combiner mech composed of 3 machines called Garuda, Gandalva, and Naga, which is the version you see on the poster, with the latter 2 machines forming the main body. This Getarobo-styled robot saw designs by Shinji Nishikawa, Minoru Yoshida, and Hurricane Ryu, who was Batra and King Ghidorah's suit actor. Although this Mecha Godzilla was actually going to be different in the sense that it was meant to go berserk at some point during the film as a result of it being built from the remains of Mecha King Ghidorah. This idea of Mecha Godzilla going rogue was then carried over into the Millennium series and later the Monsterverse, with Mecha Godzilla being powered by one of Ghidorah's severed heads. The baby Godzilla egg is there, but it was being protected by a male and a female Rodan, who try to raise it as their own. But when scientists try to steal the egg, the Rodans retaliate, resulting in G-Force and Mecha Godzilla killing the male and defeating the female just enough for the egg to be taken, as baby Godzilla comes out later on, which would attract Godzilla. The female Rodan comes back as a white Rodan, as a result of a mutation from radiation exposure, and is unfortunately killed by Mecha Godzilla during the final battle, who also kills Godzilla like in the movie. But unlike in the movie, it isn't Rodan who revives Godzilla, but a nuclear explosion from a destroyed Garuda reawakens and energizes him before finishing the fight. Wataru Mimura in this screenplay wanted to ask what it meant to truly be a monster, which makes sense considering how much of this film deals with this tangled web of conflict amongst the movie's headlining kaiju. But as we know, a lot of this would get reworked. The combining aspect of Mecha Godzilla was mostly scrapped when Katsushi Murakami, yes, that Murakami, came in to streamline it some more, with Garuda still being its own thing, and the Gatai aspect being saved for Mogera in the next film. There would be 1 Rodan instead of 2, with Godzilla showing up much earlier as a means to tie the 2 monsters closer together as living creatures against an artificial machine, which further explains why Rodan is the one who revives Godzilla near the end. Also, how and why did G-Force have nuclear weapons to begin with? And lastly, an idea that was pitched by Shinji Nishikawa was scrapped, where the radiation from the Garuda would have caused Godzilla to melt down, which would be saved for Godzilla vs. Destroya. Instead, Rodan would give him a spiral ray. Aside from this, we lost some pretty extensive development regarding the Mecha Godzilla pilots, as well as their training and their eventual team-up, as director Takao Okawara wanted to build them up in a similar fashion as Seven Samurai. If you know me, you know I'm personally not too big on the Heisei era of Godzilla, but I always enjoy taking these deep dives into what could have been. I also look back at these films much differently than I used to before, and there's no doubt a lot of creativity went into the making of these films. It's a shame that a lot of this creativity goes unseen, but hey, happens to everyone. And because of that, I can't help but appreciate it more and more. In 1966, after Toei and Rankin Bass had seen some success with their animated collaboration, The King Kong Show, the companies approached Toho to negotiate a live-action adaptation of sorts. The response was a movie centered around an island adventure where King Kong fights a giant shrimp, and Mothra is there. There's a misconception that the rights to King Kong had expired during the planning stages, but the real reason why they decided to not go with this idea was because Toei and Rankin Bass felt it wasn't close enough to the show. Also, King Kong Escapes literally came out the following year, so like, what do you mean expired rights? However, Toho, seemingly in love with this idea, decided to just swap Kong with Godzilla and call it a day. It's been said a million times already, but yes, that's literally all they did. So after Ebirah Horror the Deep, Toho decided to move forward with King Kong Escapes, featuring not just King Kong, but also Mecha Kong, who actually appeared in the cartoon. And then somewhere, a small Koichi Kawakita found inspiration. Trust me, I did not mean to tie all this back with Mecha Kong. That's going to be it for this one, ladies and gentlemen. Same as before, don't forget to check out the poll in the description and vote on which projects you would like to see get covered next. And thank you to my channel members and my Patreon supporters for your, well, support. And as always, feel free to like, share, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff, and see you guys next time. Take care, everyone.